Shouts of assent ring around the hall as the sons of Ragnar finish speaking, and ravens fly upwards, eager to bring good tidings to the Aesir. Moments later, the sky flashes with lightning and booms with thunder, signaling the approval of the gods. Days later, the mustering begins. Kings, jarls, warriors, and common folk alike gather, eager to seek vengeance on the Northumbrian king Aila for the dishonorable slaying of Ragnar. Ivar, one of Ragnar's sons, has sworn to carve the blood eagle on Aila in retribution. It is a sight to behold. Hundreds of longships bear crews of valiant Norsemen and enough supplies to last the army months. The Valkyries look on, for they will soon swell Odin's hall with brave warriors who fall in the coming battles. Ragnar's sons approach a small band of warriors with a dangerous but important quest: to scout the British Isles and establish a camp. When the army arrives, it will need a secure base from which to strike out against the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms that dominate the British mainland. Thor is pleased, for the seas are benign and the winds favorable, allowing the longships a serene passage across the North Sea. As they near York, the seat of Northumbria, the sound of the sea mingles with the grinding of axes. Skalds eagerly prepare to craft the verses for a saga that will be passed down until the end of time. Favored by Odin and Thor, the Vikings watered the ground with the blood of their enemies, seizing vast amounts of plunder and fertile land. The stench of smoke and death filled the air as hapless victims foolishly turned to their altars instead of their swords. The haughty Anglo-Saxons met their match at the hands of ruthless Viking warriors, eager to earn their place at Odin's table. True to their word, Ragnar's sons carved the blood eagle into the back of the cowardly Aila as a warning to any who might think of opposing them. Ragnar's sons settled the land that they had conquered, eventually establishing a state known as the Danelaw. For the next 2 centuries, Dane and Saxon would live as neighbors, sometimes at war, sometimes in peace, until the Saxon victory over the Norse at Stamford Bridge in 1066 foiled the last Viking invasion of England.
In the gloom, the longhouse feels empty, but it is filled with the odors of rust, tar, and animal fur, and the snoring of dogs. It is the man named Eric who speaks, smacking scarred fingers together for emphasis, the steam of his breath mingling with the wood smoke. He fills the men's heads with legends of exploration and raiding, of a sea that eats longbows, and an undiscovered country ripe for Viking occupation. He tells the Vikings that they can leave their frigid homeland and sail across the endless sea of worms to a new world brimming with wild grain, grapes, and tall trees. To the Vikings, he speaks of paradise, and of course the grizzled Norsemen are always eager for adventure. When he asks for volunteers, men slam their weapons on tables and shout his name in the cold air. Eric the Red smiles. Much of the Viking history is recorded in oral accounts called sagas, passed down through generations. 2 of the most famous sagas are reserved for the adventures of Eric the Red and his men, who crossed the mighty sea in tiny ships to forge a new Viking sovereignty. Vinland, as the New World was called, was not kind to the Vikings. Although they lacked the iron weapons of the Norsemen, the native Skraeling were fierce warriors who fought relentlessly to defend their homeland against the Norse invaders. The vastness of the North Atlantic cut the Vikings in Newfoundland off from their homeland, and they suffered many long years while trying to establish their new colony. mercenaries and Norman knights look dubiously at the ships that wobble in the black, fog-choked sea. What man is this Duke William to put so many horses on leaky transports? William ignores their questioning glances and stares across the channel in the direction of England. Edward the Confessor is dead, and now 3 men claim rulership of England. Harold the Saxon sits on the English throne, and even now hastens to fortify his shores against 2 invasions. Harald Hardrada, king of Denmark and Norway, sends Vikings from the north as William invades from the south. The outcome of this 3-way conflict is as murky as the fog that shrouds the English Channel. Harold the Saxon's housecarls are professional soldiers, not mercenaries. William's only chance is to use heavy cavalry. To do so, he must first get all of these horses onto these unreliable boats. The future of England is about to be decided. Harold the Saxon's housecarls looked certain to defend the crown for him as they fought the Vikings to a bloody stalemate at Stamford Bridge. Despite his losses, Harold marched his exhausted troops south to meet William the Conqueror near Hastings. William's archers and pikemen were no match for Harold the Saxon's veteran housecarls. Harold even broke the charge of William's knights. William himself went down in the fray, and as rumors of his death spread, the Normans turned to flee. William was not dead, however, and he rallied his troops by throwing aside his helmet so they could see his clean-shaven face and know he was alive. William and his armored knights rode down the housecarls, breaking the Saxon force, and continued their ride all the way to London. William was crowned king on Christmas Day. Because his reign eventually ushered England into a position of unprecedented world leadership, the year 1066 became established as the most famous day in English history. The rains come again until there is nothing left of road, wood, or field, nothing in the entire world but mud. The exhausted English soldiers hoist their longbows over their heads, trying to protect the precious yew wood from the water. The empty wagons can scarcely roll forward, even though all the supplies have long been eaten. Terrifying hoofbeats resound from the rear. The French knights have come. The English have been in a slow retreat ever since the debacle at Harfleur, where King Henry V's glorious siege dragged on and on, costing the lives of 3,000 Englishmen. Now, Henry has all but abandoned his dream of establishing his hereditary claim to the French crown. Like his men, he only wants to reach Calais and the ships that will return them home to England. On the road back to Calais, the French army overtakes Henry. Knowing that the English are fatigued, starving, and outnumbered 3-1, the French have no interest in negotiation. The English make their stand on a wooded hilltop. The archers plant stakes in the ground to offer some barrier against the deadly French cavalry. Henry's only hope is that his lightly armored infantry prove more nimble than the impetuous French knights, and that the range of his archers can even the odds before the French horses are upon them. The Battle of Agincourt is remembered not because it was an inevitable triumph, but because it was an upset. Outnumbered English longbows were victorious over French knights only because the knights had to charge up a muddy hill through a dense forest. The English wore little armor and were able to catch the encumbered French in the middle of their retreat. A charge by Henry and his surviving cavalry pushed aside the beaten French and opened the road to the coast. Despite his victory, Henry did not follow through on his attack, but withdrew to England. The true winner of the battle was Burgundy, which was able to come to power in a vacuum emptied by both the English and the French. It is impossible to imagine the world ending on such a fine fall day. Yet the storm of Muslim horsemen continues to rage throughout Europe, leaving conquered cities and shattered armies stunned in its wake. The lightning-quick strikes of the Muslim horsemen break the city of Bordeaux and then Poitiers, leaving precious little of the Frankish kingdom to defend. Yet Charles Martel gathers the disheartened Frankish army for one last stand at the city of Tours. Arabic horses, bred for speed and beauty, begin to splash across the Vienne River. Martel's knights and swordsmen, trudging under the weight of iron mail, struggle to interpose themselves between the Muslims and the city of Tours. Carrion birds circle in the air, anticipating the savagery to come. The rest of Europe watches anxiously, for this is the climax of the Muslim invasion and the last stand of Christian Europe. The soul of the Frankish army was its knights, but Charles Martel knew that his cavalry, undisciplined, buried under the weight of weapons and armor, could not match the swiftness of the Muslim riders. Therefore, he ordered the knights to dismount and join ranks with the Frankish swordsmen to form a tight shield wall. The Muslims had always conquered with swift defensiveness and were not equipped to counter the Franks' defensive strategy. The arrows of the Muslim archers bounced harmlessly off the heavy Frankish armor, and the light Muslim cavalry could not breach the human chain. Battered and bleeding, the invaders broke ranks and fled back to the Pyrenees and the protection of Spain. From Charles Martel's Frankish kingdom eventually grew the Holy Roman Empire, making him the founding father of both Germany and France.
Hidden in the dense jungle of the Yucatan, the Mayan civilization thrives. Massive stone pyramids carved with images of gods and kings tower above the sea of green vegetation. The Yucatan is dominated by two city-states, Tikal and Calakmul. Competing for control of the rich trade routes throughout the peninsula, the two cities have warred with each other for as long as anyone can remember. To secure the jade and cacao trade, Tikal founded the city of Dos Pilas. Now the old king of Tikal sends his youngest son, Balazs Chan Kawil, to rule it, while his oldest son will rule Tikal itself. Balazs, however, is not happy with his small inheritance. The god of war plants seeds of resentment and hate in him, and Balazs is convinced that he would be a better ruler of Tikal than his brother. After years of conflict, the war god's thirst for blood was satisfied. Balazs, having betrayed his father and brother and sacked the city he held dear, was plagued by guilt. Despite his victory, he relinquished his claim on Tikal and instead returned to Dos Pilas, where he spent the remainder of his days. Later, Tikal was rebuilt, and it finally overcame its rival Calakmul. However, it never truly recovered from the betrayal of one of its dearest sons, and the Mayan civilization steadily declined.
The haze of spent gunpowder hangs over the gravel-strewn beach, confusing the seabirds that nest on the rocky outcroppings of Xinhai Bay. As soon as the winds of the eastern sea disrupt the cloud, the Japanese Navy will return, cannons blazing at the sea walls and at what remains of the Korean fleet. Although the army has so far managed to repel any of the samurai that have waded ashore, it is only a matter of time before the Japanese are victorious. The last hope for the Korean Navy is an innovative commander named Yi Shu-shin. Admiral Yi is constructing a secret weapon, a ship with iron armor that can withstand the Japanese cannon and a spiked hull to repel boarders. He calls these ships Kobuksan, or turtle ships. If Admiral Yi can ready his fleet of turtle ships in time, then the Koreans stand a chance of defeating the Japanese. On the other hand, if he is too late... The Japanese were unable to establish a base in either China or Korea. Therefore, all supplies and reinforcements had to come from the Japanese islands themselves. Once Admiral Yi destroyed the Japanese navy, the samurai armies were left isolated, and the invasion ended. Yu Shi-shin died in the battle, but the Japanese commander Hideyoshi died soon after, and with him the lust for Japanese conquest. The possibility of a Japanese empire in Eastern Asia in the 16th century died under the guns of slow but deadly armored Korean warships.
Gliding through the trees, the wind whispers a faint melody to the rhythm of the footsteps of soldiers. The narrow mountain pass feels ominous and forbidding, and yet there is a peaceful aura to it that calms Minamoto's vanguard. The common soldiers groan as a deluge suddenly begins, transforming the soil into a treacherous sea of mud. The battle-hardened samurai alone are silent. Their honor is their prime concern, and it rests on the success of their mission to deliver supplies to the besieged city of Kurikara. After years of injustice, the Minamoto clan declared open opposition to the dominance of the wicked Taira, splitting Japan in two. Lord Minamoto controls the east, while his cousin, Yoshinaka, holds the frontier. Throughout 2.5 years of war, the Taira have steadily advanced, rarely seeing defeat. Their armies strike at Kurikara in a three-pronged assault, while an auxiliary force seizes the lighthouse at the point of the Noto Peninsula, controlling naval passage in and out of the Koyama Gulf. Entourages of samurai patrol all roads to Kurikara, and enemy supply lines reach all the way to Kyoto, the imperial capital. This will be the decisive battle of this war. If Kurikara falls, the Taira will be free to flood into the Minamoto heartland and claim victory. If Kurikara holds and the Taira are defeated, the tide will turn, and Minamoto may even be able to bring the fight to the gates of Kyoto. Thunder boomed as spears of lightning pierced the sky. Driven back from the walls of Kurikara, the Taira army retreated in panic as Minamoto claimed victory after victory. Smoke rose from the enemy camps and floated towards Kyoto, an ominous shadow of the doom approaching those inside the city. Offering thanks and prayers to the gods, Minamoto halted and made camp outside Kyoto. Secretly pounded the walls for days, reducing its great castles to piles of rubble. As the main gate fell, samurai poured into the city, while Minamoto strode triumphantly to the imperial palace and planted his banner. With the power of the Taira broken and their capital taken, a seemingly doomed rebellion had triumphed. It would take 2 more long years, but Minamoto's prowess as a commander ensured victory at the Battle of Danoura, ending the Genpei War and ushering in the new era of the Kamakura Shogunate. In the distance, wooden towers as tall as giants take shape in the dense morning fog that hovers over the vast Poyang Lake. These wooden islands, each carrying 2,000 or 3,000 men and horses, are tall enough to scale city walls. Their target is the Ming city of Nanchang. The Mongol Yuan dynasty is on the verge of collapse, and Chinese warlords are eager to take its place. The Han want to make use of the fighting between their rivals, the Ming and the Wu, to launch a surprise attack on the Ming and the Wu, to capture the city. and seize the Yangtze region from them. The Ming, however, are not prepared to surrender Nongchang so easily, and their army sails north to face the Han. The Ming general, Zhu Yuanzhang, is outnumbered, but he is determined to thwart the Han ambitions. After all, only one warlord can rule China. Although vastly outnumbered by the large Han tower ships, the smaller and more maneuverable Ming vessels were better suited for the shallow water. During the second night of the battle, the Ming launched a surprise attack with fire ships, which devastated many of the Han ships. Thousands of Han soldiers drowned or burned alive. The Ming victory secured their position as the strongest faction in China. In time, they conquered the Middle Kingdom, ending a century of Mongol domination. The new dynasty ruled China for nearly 3 centuries, ushering in a great age of prosperity and stability.
The ships slide through a mirror-flat ocean stained red with spring seaweed. Columns of rock improbably draped with pine trees tower out of the mist. The men on the ships watch silently as the samurai prowl the deck above. They will make land near Kyoto, and their lord Hideyoshi will lead the siege of the city of 10,000 shrines. Within Kyoto, rebels hold prisoner Lord Nobunaga, the man who would unify Japan. The islands of Japan remain a patchwork of bickering samurai warlords, who still settle conflicts with ritualized duels. Nobunaga seeks to forge a single Japan, dragging the provincial samurai into the modern era. Like his master Nobunaga, Hideyoshi wins his battles by volleys of muskets, fully exploiting the firearms recently introduced by Portuguese sailors. Hideyoshi intends no bargaining. He will demand once for Nobunaga's release, then storm the city. Kyoto paid dearly for Nobunaga's death, and in the end, Hideyoshi was able to accomplish what his mentor could not. By 1590, Japan was a unified country. Great though it was, this accomplishment did not satisfy Hideyoshi, who then set about on an ambitious plan to conquer China and Korea. Japan was not free of conflict, as civil wars continued to rise and fall for many years. However, the Ieyasu family, former allies of Hideyoshi, continued to rule Japan as shoguns until the 19th century.
Throughout Europe, church bells ring while screams and the smell of burning wood fill the air. Everybody knows of the terror of the Vikings and their feared longships, but those who dwell inland face another horror. Maya horsemen strike deep into the European heartland, raiding, plundering, and killing without distinction. These nomadic pagans come from far to the east, where they were driven out from their homelands by their aggressive neighbors. Now they have arrived in Europe, and their lightning-quick raids terrify the locals. The rulers of Europe are powerless to stop these swift-mounted marauders. Raiding, however successful, cannot sustain the Maya tribes forever, and they are ready to settle down. Scouts have found a suitable location to the south, large open grasslands, similar to the steppes of the Mayas' ancestral home, lie within the Carpathian Basin. Only the eastern Franks, Moravians, and Bulgarians stand in their way. If the Mayas can defeat them, the tribes will once again have a land to call their own. The Maya horsemen annihilated the Frankish army and utterly destroyed the empire of Great Moravia. After centuries of wandering the steppes, they could finally settle down to create their own kingdom. Many, however, rejected the thought of exchanging their bows for plows. Not until Otto the Great, founder of the Holy Roman Empire, defeated them at the Battle of Lakefell, did the Maiar raids finally come to an end. After this defeat, the Maiar nomads adopted European ways, converted to the Christian faith, and transformed into farmers. They founded the Kingdom of Hungary, whose army was famed for its combined elements of nomadic horsemen and heavy cavalry. For centuries, Hungary would stand firm as the frontier stronghold of Europe, resisting invaders from the east, invaders much like the first Maiar raiders who ventured into Europe. As the Mongols descend on the Near East, the Turkish Sultanate of Rum is on its last legs and will likely soon crumble. Several Turkish chiefs in Anatolia, called Beys, are ready to seize the Sultan's lands. Their warriors are hardy and fierce, untamed by the niceties of the Rum court. Once the Sultanate is theirs, nothing will stop their further expansion west into Byzantine lands. The most fierce of the Turkish Beys is Osman, the Bone Breaker, a reputable man who claims to have been given the authority to rule over the world by God himself. He is determined to unite the Turks against their common enemies. Facing Osman is the proclaimed savior of the Byzantine Empire, Roger de Flor, a former Knight Templar and commander of the Catalan Company of Mercenaries. Years of service fighting for the lords and princes of Europe have made him and his soldiers hardened veterans. The future of Europe and the Middle East will be decided by the outcome of the battle between these two great men. Roger de Flor proved to be a match for Osman. He managed to defeat Turkish armies on several occasions and almost drove them out of Anatolia. Just as de Flor neared his greatest victory, he was betrayed. The jealous Byzantine nobles, fearing that de Flor would take the reconquered lands for himself, ordered his assassination. In retaliation, de Flor's Catalan company ravaged Byzantine Anatolia and Greece before returning home with the body of their esteemed commander. With de Flor finally gone, Osman could complete his conquests and consolidate his power. The other Turkish beys soon acknowledged his rule, and he founded his own empire that would bear his name, Osmanli Devleti, the Ottoman Empire.
The steady splashing of oars of 200 ships striking the water drowns out all other sound. The most powerful fleet ever assembled by Don Juan of Austria and his allies in Venice sails under the burning light of dawn towards a final encounter with the Ottoman Turks. The Turkish army has greatly expanded its empire, adding North Africa and Mesopotamia to the Turkish holdings in Anatolia, but has finally been turned back by a staunch defense of Hungary. Undaunted, the Turks turn their attention to the Mediterranean, where they intend to break the Christian naval powers of Venice and Spain. Now, 200 rowed galleys and 6 heavy galleasses lumber into the Bay of Lepanto to meet the 270 galleys of the Turkish fleet. The ships draw up with scarcely 5 miles separating the distance between them. A storm of arrows darkens the sky, and the drone of splashing oars is finally drowned out by the thunder of cannon. The heavy Venetian galleasses broke through the Turkish lines and trampled over the smaller ships of the Turks. But there were too few of the galleasses to win the battle on their own. the Spanish and Venetians attempted to grapple and board the Turkish ships, where the superior experience and weapons of the Christian sailors could be brought to bear. As the day wore on, the Turkish juggernaut began to run out of strength. Scores of Turkish galleys were dashed on the rocks, and others sank to the bottom of the bay. Less than 50 Turkish ships survived the battle. Lepanto was not the climax of the conflict between the Christians and the Turks on the Mediterranean, but it was a turning point. The Turks had difficulty rebuilding their fleet back to its former size, while the Christians continued to update their fleets with the latest technological advancements, ensuring a decisive military advantage for further encounters on the high seas.
Deus Lavolt, God wills it. This zealous shout resounds throughout Europe as news spreads of a third crusade, called by the Pope himself. 3 of Europe's most renowned rulers have sworn to fight: Frederick Barbarossa of the Holy Roman Empire, Philip Augustus of France, and Richard the Lionheart, King of England. While the Emperor Barbarossa marches his army across Europe, the kings of France and England sail to the Holy Land. Richard's journey, however, is as adventurous as one can expect of someone known as the Lionheart. A Mediterranean storm scatters the English fleet and shipwrecks many of Richard's ships on the island of Cyprus. The island's ruler and rebellious Byzantine lord, Isaac Komnenos, has taken the stranded English prisoner. Among the captured is Richard's very own sister. Richard is determined to punish Komnenos for this insult, but he also sees opportunity in these unfortunate events. Cyprus is an island of great strategic value. If the English can capture it, Cyprus could be used as a naval base for the crusade and raids on the wealthy Muslim trade ships. Richard's combined naval and land operations proved to be successful, and Cyprus was swiftly taken by the Crusaders. Isaac was thrown into the dungeons, and Richard crowned himself king of the island. Richard then sailed east to resume his crusade. Upon his arrival in the Holy Land, however, Richard discovered that he alone remained to lead the crusade. Barbarossa had drowned crossing an Anatolian river, and Philip Augustus had returned to France with an illness. Despite these setbacks, Richard proved more than capable of the task ahead, matching wits with the famed Saladin. Richard is remembered as a brave warrior, a skilled commander, and a righteous king, renowned for his patronage of poetry as well as his martial exploits. He remains the ideal of the romantic chivalric knight and an iconic figure in both England and France.
Minarets of dust twist upwards as horse hooves strike the fractured earth. Thousands of Seljuk Turks stream across the Anatolian plateau to converge on the walled town of Manzikert, which was recently recaptured by the Byzantine army. The Byzantines are the heirs of Rome, and their armored cataphracts and legions of disciplined swordsmen can smash aside the light-armored Turkish horse archers, provided they can catch them. However, an unlikely turn of events has greatly improved the Turks' chances for victory. The Byzantine army is racked by treachery and deceit from within. One day, a band of mercenaries deserts the Byzantines. On another, the army's second-in-command leads a treacherous conspiracy against the commanding general. If the Turks can somehow turn the splintering factions against the Byzantine army, they may overcome a better equipped and better trained enemy. As long as the sun was in the sky, the Byzantine army could fight the Turks back towards their camp. When dusk settled over Anatolia, however, the Turks could harass the ponderous Byzantine cavalry as it withdrew to Manzikert. When they could stand no more of this torment, the Byzantine flanks collapsed into a full rout, and the Turkish horse archers pounced for a quick kill. The Battle of Manzikert was not lost due to the poor performance of soldiers or commanders, but through Byzantine treachery. Deceit from within the armies disrupted the chain of command, as factions feuding for control of the throne in Constantinople betrayed their armies at the front. A much weakened Byzantium was then forced to call the rest of the Christian West for help, leading to the Crusades. The Byzantine Empire lingered for another 4 centuries, but in only a shadow of its former glory.
73 long years have passed since thousands of nomadic riders flooded the eastern borders of Persia, defeated the Persian army, and killed the Shah himself. The invaders plunged deep into the heartland of the empire. The weakened Persians had no choice but to give in to the outrageous demands of tribute imposed by the White Huns. Now Khosrau, the grandson of the slain Shah, is ready to take revenge for the eternal shame cast upon his empire. Persian heralds visit the 4 corners of the empire to gather one of the largest armies this world has ever seen. But even with an army that could fill the space between the Zagros and the Alborz mountain ranges, the White Hunnic horse archers will not be easily beaten. Khosrau knows that perhaps the only way to ensure victory is to ally with another nomadic people, the Gökturks. These nomads from lands hardly touched by civilization hate the White Huns as much as the Persians do. They are as tough and hardy as the White Huns, and most importantly, can strike the Huns from their rear. The earth trembles as thousands of Persian horses and elephants travel to battle. Khosrau will soon show the world that the Persian Empire is still a force to be reckoned with. The White Huns were powerful, but too disorganized to cope with multiple invasions. When the Persians and their Turkic allies launched a 2-pronged attack, the White Huns panicked. The mighty Persian beasts of war and swift, accurate Turkish horse archers crushed the disorientated enemy within 8 days. After the Persian victory at Bukhara, the White Huns faded into history, and the Gökturks and Persians divided the conquered land among themselves. Under Khosrau, Persia once more became a worthy rival of the Byzantine Empire, while the Turks established themselves in the vacuum left by the White Huns.